All right. Thank you for being here. Dianne Pearce and David Yurkovich. I don't know if I said those names right, but I hope so.
You did.
Editors and publishers. How is editing different from writing?
Oh, wow. Oh, well, that's an interesting question. Dave, do you want to take that one first?
Well, yeah, sure. Well, they're not mutually exclusive, right? Because writing is the genesis of like creation of what your ideas are and putting them either onto paper or onto a word processor, writing out all your ideas. I have not met a single writer yet who does not self-edit as they write. In other words, you write a sentence, the gray, I don't know, the dog jumped over the fence, and then you look at it and say, oh, there's a better way to say it. You've just edited. So you are doing writing as you edit. For our purposes, as current words, well, we take the entirety of someone's manuscript and perform either a digital, a developmental or a copy edit, or perhaps both. Each has its own different requirements, right? A copy edit is different than a developmental edit. In the developmental edit, you're looking at things kind of globally and making sure that the story makes sense, that if a character's voice is represented in chapter 1, it still sounds like the same character in chapter 21 and things like that. Whereas with the copy edit, you're looking more for things like grammar, punctuation, consistency of numbers, capitalization consistency, things like that, run-on sentences, repetitive use of pronouns, ambiguities, and things like that. Dianne, anything you want to add to that?
The only thing I would add to it is that Dave is right, that all writers edit while they write. And I recommend it a lot of times. I do book coaching with people, and if people are stuck partway through their book, a lot of times people get stuck in the middle. I'll suggest they go back and read from the beginning, or if it's, going to be a 300-page book, maybe from a quarter of the way through, so that they sort of get the story back into their own heads, and they'll edit as they do that. And so it helps them kind of get back into the feel of their book. But a lot of writing has really exploded. Everybody's, not everybody, but a lot of people are writing now. A lot of people are self-publishing. And a lot of people feel that they can do the edit themselves, but they really can't. And one of the lucky things in our lives as writers too is that we're married to each other because we edit for each other. You just miss stuff. You just don't know what you don't know. You don't see how you've gone off track with your character. And so you need a second set of eyes, a set of eyes that are different from your own. So I feel like it's really important that a writer get outside help from somebody. But, the nice thing about the way publishing is today is that a lot of people can DIY, and that means anybody can kind of get into it and do it if they want to, and they're a self-starter, and that's great. But I do think that the quality will not be as good if they're not getting that second opinion.
How many editing jobs or maybe a job, can you do at once? Or do you just do one, finish it, and then start another? Or do you do a little bit on one and then a little bit on another?
Well, primarily right now, I do most of our editing because Dave does our book design and the production stuff. And I have been editing for a billion years, really. And so I'm pretty fast. Most editors edit around 5 pages an hour. I tend to do somewhere between 15 and 20 because I've been doing it so long, and I read really quickly. But still, I also need a break from the particular story that I'm working on, and it helps me come back to it with fresh eyes. So I might edit one book on Monday, another book on Tuesday, another book on Wednesday, depending on how many we have going. Sometimes it's to publish, sometimes it's just to be an editor. Um, so a lot of editors, have figured out what their pace is, how many things they can do at once. I don't know if it's typical to take one project and do it to completion, but usually I'll spread a book out over 4 weeks and I'll do a quarter each week because that helps me do my best work. And so all editors kind of have to find their footing in that way.
Do you do the developmental editing and the copy editing at the same time, or
I do,
find
yeah.
it easier to split? Okay.
No, I do it all at once. And then if the book is going to be published by us, then we send it out after the writer goes through the edits. Then we send it out to a proofreader because we want somebody whose job is just to be sort of the nitpicky, squeaky clean person. So we send it out to a third set of eyes as part of our publishing process.
So proofreading differs from copy editing because it's 100% systematic, right? So there are specific rules of a proofreader that they would follow. Whereas developmental copy editing, there's 100% subjectivity into it, right? Because Dianne could look at a paragraph and say this paragraph's fine, but she could also then look at it more subjectively as from the reader experience and say, oh, you know what? I need to make some changes here. Whereas a proofreader knows, like, all right, you use a semicolon here, you use a colon here, you use a single quotation here, you use a superscript here, a subscript there. There's really no creativity in it, and you don't want there to be. You should always know what you're getting from your proofread.
Yeah, and when we send a book out to a proofreader, Dave's completely made it into the paperback file, so it looks as much as the book will look. And so the proofreader will also check the table of contents to see that if it says that the third chapter starts on page 18, it actually does. They'll check the running heads to make sure. Sometimes, depending on what the author wants, sometimes there's a book title on the left and the author name on the right, or just the page numbers, whatever it might be. But the proofreader will check for that, because a lot of times if an author they get the edit from us and then they bring it back to us after they've gone through the edits. And then sometimes they'll contact Dave and say, oh, wait, I want to change this other thing. It'll mess up the pagination a little bit. So the proofreader goes behind us and makes sure that we've dotted every I that we need to dot. So that really helps. And like Dave said, there's creativity in editing. There is, but I would say for me as an editor, my creativity is sort of like somebody might decide to pretend they have an English accent. I pretend I have the accent of the writer. Like I try to take on the writer's voice and I try to figure out where the writer wanted it to go. Some editors will go in there and say, I would like it better if it did this, but that's not really their job. Their job is to help the writer figure out the writer's vision. So I try really hard to mimic what the writer has already started doing so that I just sort of fix the bumps and smooth out, or figure out what's missing. Sometimes there's stuff missing and writers don't catch it. I read a self-published book once, and the main character, who I really, really liked, it was a drug cartel book. It was very violent. The writer had him have an accident when he was really thought he was going to die. And then in the next scene, he had him give a news conference, and he never said anything about him changing his clothing. And I just imagined him in his soiled clothes giving the news conference. And I was really angry at the writer over that. And so my job is to make sure that the writer doesn't embarrass themselves in that way, that they get their vision, that they inspire that fear if they want to have a drug cartel sort of story, but that they don't damage their characters or their standing with their fans, and that's what you really want to do.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the continuity aspect of editing, right? Sometimes you need to tell your author that hey, there's a scene missing here. It could be a sentence, it could be a paragraph, it could be something more expanded. But in the example Dianne gave, really just needed like a sentence or two, even a single sentence, just to clarify for the reader's perspective, because now the reader has completely put in their head what they think is happening, and it's
Right.
probably not reflective of what the writer intended to be happening. And then on what Dianne was saying about maintaining the author's voice, I think that's really, really important. And it took me a while to recognize that, just in working with Dianne, that it's really important that the wordsmithing of the book be done professionally as you're editing, but at the same time, it shouldn't be at the cost of the writer's voice. And when you go into that territory, you really risk like taking an author's words and vision, as Dianne said, and crafting them into your own, which is really not our jobs. Or we're not here to take your story or anyone's story and say, oh wait, I can make this better. Let's rewrite this. Like, to Diane's point, you're basically like, if you notice that, I think you used the word like an accent, you just follow through with that for consistency's sake. You don't take a concept or something that somebody's put a year or two of their life in and just say, oh, now I'm going to make it mine. So we're very cognizant of that, and we really want to maintain the author's originality whenever a project comes our way.
Yeah, it reminds me of those old house decorating shows back in the 90s when people would swap houses, and they would take somebody's family room of a family that had, 3 young children under the age of 10, and they'd do it all in white. And the family would come back to it and say, "You don't understand us at all."
Trading spaces. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember that.
Yeah, you have to understand what the writer is going for, and you have to make it better, not yours.
Yeah, it makes me think about grading papers and where you can tell the person's voice pretty quickly after reading just even a short paper. So then if you're grading multiple papers by a person, it's much easier to tell when something's afoot, whether it's a quote that's not quoted or somebody else writing it or whatever. I haven't graded papers in the time of AI and AI being able to write papers, but it was always, my mom was an English teacher, and I wondered how she did that, knowing when somebody was writing something else and passing it off as theirs, like a plagiarizing or whatever.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
when I started teaching, I was like, oh, you can tell pretty easily when a person's voice changes. So if they're going to copy it, they need to copy the whole thing.
what did you teach?
I taught at University of Phoenix, not online, but in a brick and mortar building in Virginia Beach. And
Okay.
it was law enforcement ethics and law enforcement history. So it was interesting to have people that plagiarized papers in a law enforcement ethics class taught to people that wanted to be law enforcement by law enforcement. So it was fun.
Yeah.
But it did take longer to grade a paper with incorrect sightings, let's put it a nice way,
Yeah.
than it did to do one that was all properly laid out. So I can appreciate proofreading, the proofreading side, the difference between that and the side of content, and does it make sense? Does it look right? Does it make sense? But
Yeah, no, I think you're right on track there. When I first started teaching writing, we did it in the classroom only, and there wasn't online. That's how old I am. But then we had to give them a certain amount of papers that they write on in the class on time, and that gave you a real insight to their writing. Today, I think even a student who's going to maybe use AI, still they're going to email their teachers, and they're not going to use AI for that. And anybody who's, worth their salt can figure out pretty quickly that there's a huge difference in the writing. So it behooves you students to write decent emails to your teachers.
Some of the teachers I know now, they say if they have a word that doesn't seem like it's a word the student would use, they put it into a vocabulary list. And then that's what their vocabulary is. Like if they are learning 10 words or 20 words a week, they put that up there and then they ask that person what it is since they've used it 3 times in a paper. So
yeah, no, that's a smart idea too.
Curb the use of that. But when you do your editing, do you print it out and write notes in the margin, or are you doing it all online or all on the computer?
Yeah, we do it on Word. And, even though Dave and I publish, somebody might come to us just for editing, but pretty much universally, all of the publications that are out there from a place that might, be looking for a poetry submission to a publisher that's looking for an entire book, everybody's using Microsoft Word still. In college, sometimes they use Google Docs. I have a Mac, so sometimes I like to use Pages, but pretty much standard is Microsoft Word. And there are still editors out there who want the author to send it to them on paper, and they want to send it back on paper. But that's an extra job for the writer then, because the writer then has to incorporate all of that back into their electronic file. Without an electronic file, they can't submit anywhere. So and they certainly, even if they were self-publishing, you can't DIY with a paper book. You have to have it electronically. So it's a disservice now. And some editors have not switched over, but they really need to, because the author deserves that from you. And so Word will run a column of comments on the side. So I use the comments extensively because I don't want to change the person's voice. So I might ask them, I'm reading this way, but I feel like it should come that way. Here's a sample of what I might do. What do you think? And then in that way, I'm trying to have a conversation with them about their writing rather than just going through and making a change. And Word also does track changes. So if I take out the word blue and I put in the word red, it'll cross out blue and it'll write in red, actually in the color blue, I think. So that's confusing, but so that the author can see, and then the author can click on it and check accept or reject. And it's their opportunity to really feel that they're still in control of their work, which is really important. I feel like all of the editing that I do is suggested. Sometimes it's more recommended than others because I have experience and maybe you want to listen to me. But yeah, the idea is really to give them control, and we don't know what we don't know, right? One of the first things I edited was a man's memoir of his family escaping France during the Holocaust. And he had been trying for 20 years to get it published, and he couldn't get it published. And when he gave it to me, I realized that through the course of his family going through Europe, back and forth, trying to get out, they encountered other parts of the families, aunts, uncles, cousins, but he never told us what happened to them. And a lot of times he knew, but a lot of times they didn't know, which means they probably didn't survive. But the reader needed him to answer those questions. And he never thought about it because his family kind of had an understanding. So for me, I would just say to him, well, what happened to Gertrude? And he filled that in, and within a couple of months of going through that, he was able to get a publisher. So really, his story was compelling. It was true. It was well written. He was actually a newspaper reporter, so he'd been writing for many years, but he didn't realize that he was leaving these bits out. And so a lot of what I did with him was just telling him that he needed to put the information in, and that was enough.
I think that comes back to being like so close to the story that in your head, you've told it completely. Every detail that the reader needs is there. but you've got this tunnel vision and you don't recognize that. So having that having a set of editorial eyes is essential in those regards. And I wanted to mention too, Dianne mentioned about adding comments in the Word files when doing copy editing. I noticed that one of the things Dianne does really well is uses those comments as teaching moments more than anything else. So she might make a fix in the manuscript, but then in a comment explain the relevancy of that fix. So we don't want writers to kind of look at our edits or Diane's edits really and say, I don't understand why did she change this? Why did she change this? Especially if something, let's face it, some things are obvious, right? It's a typo or it's just clearly the wrong tense used. But in those instances where it's not clear, she'll add a note just to say, hey, just FYI, whenever you write a sentence in this format, this is the way it has to be. And I think the feedback we generally get is like, wow, I didn't know that. Thanks. I'll use that going forward.
Yeah, one thing that I see a lot, just as an example, especially with a newer writer, is that they'll have one character's paragraph kind of thing, and their characters going through the same thing, but they've broken it up into multiple small paragraphs, maybe because they feel like it adds drama. But when you have multiple small paragraphs over and over and over again, the reader gets tired because the reader's eyes have to move down to the next paragraph. So you really have to think about that reader experience while you're writing it, because you don't want the reader. A lot of people read before bed, or they read on public transportation or something, and you don't want them to be like, oh, and to the point where it wears them out and they close the book. You want to keep them going. So you have to sort of understand the pacing that a paragraph break makes. And so you need to have some small paragraphs, but really it should be larger to keep the narrative flowing better. So a lot of times what I'm doing to people is just telling them, connect this back up, because it feels like going down tiny little steps. It's like, oh, when are these stairs going to end? Sorry.
Yeah. When you put the notes in there, do you ever do notes of like encouragement or if you say like, I didn't know Janet was going to do this, or let's see what happens to Janet next in the next chapter. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah. And I make a point to do that. A long time ago, I got a job where I became a supervisor of people. And I'm kind of an introvert. I think a lot of authors are introverted. And I would get in very early on Monday morning and I would start working. And my employees would come in and I'd kind of like wave at them, but I'd just keep going. And I learned it wasn't good people management. So I would write a note on a sticky note on my computer when I went home on Friday night. Remember to ask Jane about her weekend on Monday, because I literally would forget. So I translated that over when I started doing editing, because I realized that it's important for writers to know what they're doing well. And that's every bit as good as teaching them about pronoun reference. So when I see that they've made a really interesting move, or the character is described really well, or the dialogue is especially fresh, I put a little note to tell them what I really liked, because they should take that edit and use it in future work too, right? So they need to know when they've done things that are surprising and interesting, as well as when they've missed a comma. So yeah, I try to do a lot of both. I try to even it out.
Nice. When I've looked at things for friends, I usually print them out and then just write my comments on there. And then if I'm sending it back to them, like if they emailed it to me, then I'll scan it back in and then send it back in a PDF. It's not going to help them, if they're doing, I wouldn't call myself a serious editor. So if they're counting on me for editing, that's probably not the best choice. But as far as for comments and development, then I feel like I can do that, track the story, see what works, see what's not. and then give them an insight into what a reader is thinking. So I like those comments of just like the explanation of wow or good line or things like that. And I found it takes longer, but I like breaking those up with different color pens. So I'll write comments of that in one, and then like usually if I see an error in a word or some sort of punctuation or something, I'll just note it because I'm there. So I'll note it with red because classic, mark that
Yeah.
up with red. But then other comments, I'll try to find out what their favorite color is. And then that's the one I put the good comments in. And then if I am like, whoa, no, I disagree with what happened here, or this lost me right here or something, then I'll have a different color for that versus just a note of interest, or this makes me think about this and this. So it's from a writer standpoint, I understand how exciting it is to get somebody's view of what you wrote back. So when people ask me to do it, I'm like, whoa, I got to get this back quick, because
That's nice.
as soon
Yeah.
as I send it off to somebody, I'm like, hey, I wonder if they're reading it right now. I wonder when I'm going to get that back. You got to just put it out of your mind. But yeah, I try to get those turned around well. The stress of editing as a job would be, yeah, I'm not sure I want to get involved with that, just because I'm like, oh, I know this person is depending on my view of this to get their project going forward. How do
Yeah.
you deal with people that are resistant to edits?
Well, so there are people that are resistant to edits. Dave and I have encountered a lot of that. We started down this road because we wanted to finish our own books, which I still haven't really gotten there. But Dave is a very good, very workmanlike author, so he gets his work done. But in order to sort of motivate ourselves, we had started a writing workshop locally where we were living when we were back on the East Coast. And there we had a lot of people in our writing group, and some of them were better writers than others, which is pretty much par for the course. Some of them were completely anti getting any feedback from the group. They would get really upset, and it took a while for people to understand it, because it's so personal, and you feel like it's so much a part of you, right? It's almost like somebody is seeing you naked in a way, right? And so to take that feedback that something isn't working, and pretty much we would say in our writing group, there was 10 of us, and we would say if a majority of us feel like it doesn't work, we think that maybe that's a clue that you ought to revisit it. So it's hard, and in person, we've had people be like that. There are people that I've edited who sometimes they'll make the suggested changes, sometimes they won't. Dave and I we don't want to publish just anybody. We're willing to help anybody, but we want to make sure that we put our company name on books that we feel like are well written. So if push comes to shove, we might have to turn a book away if we feel like it's not really ready for consumption. But we do try to work with writers as much as possible. And that's why I try to teach with my comments too, because a lot of times authors don't know, and I want them to understand that I'm not trying to make them feel dumb. I'm trying to make them better, and also trying to make it easy for the reader. I never go in assuming that the author is dumb, but I always want the author to go in assuming that the reader is dumb. Most people in the United States, and you might know this from your mom being an English teacher and stuff. There's something called your reading lexile. It's the level that you read at. And most people in the United States read 4 years back from the highest grade they went to in school. And most people in the United States are still only high school graduates, which means they're reading at an 8th grade level. So it has to be
Better than I thought.
yeah, but it has to be clear for somebody to understand who reads at an 8th grade level. You know, and my father only went to 8th grade. He never went past that. So he never was a reader. He never was comfortable with it. He never liked doing it. My mother did all his reading for him. So you have to think about that, because the majority of the audience is going to be people who are reading at an 8th grade level. But sometimes writers like to use, 10-cent vocabulary and things like that. And that's great, but they have to use it in a way that it's clear enough for the reader to kind of get the meaning from the context. And that means working on things like using the pronouns correctly, using who for people and that for things, stuff like that, that people just don't understand because they haven't studied it, which is okay. They have a good story to tell. Dave and I have worked with quite a few writers who we would say are really grammatically challenged, but tell a great story, right, Dave? And we've really worked with them. Yeah. Go ahead. What, Dave?
Yeah, for sure. Like if it's a really compelling story, then yeah, Dianne, right, or I might need to do a much heavier edit just to get it grammatically correct. But if the story has a great payoff, it's time well spent for us. So yeah, it really varies author to author.
Yeah, we don't judge based on the author's education level. That doesn't matter to us.
Yeah, it's really story to story. Honestly.
Yeah.
One of the things you hear a lot is that if you're going to write, you have to read a lot.
True.
And I always was like, I don't know. I don't know about that. But I think that it's relative, because what is reading a lot? So I think that what you were talking about is probably the most important part of reading a lot, which is knowing how words are supposed to be used. And if you don't have that base of grammar, then it's going to really slow the story down for a reader that does read other things. So you have to blend in enough to make sense. And then if you're trying to do something different with some sort of different style choice, that's different than not knowing when to use that and when to use who. So maybe that's the value I see in that. In the other part of the 8th grade reading level, I wonder how much different 8th grade reading level is now than it was 50 years ago. I imagine the 8th grade level 50 years ago was more impressive than the 8th grade level these days. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a really good point. I would say maybe yes, because I feel like education, our daughter is 15, so she's going through K through 12 right now, and education is trying to make things palatable for students, which is a good thing, and the pandemic messed things up and all that kind of stuff. And anytime a student likes what they're learning, they do a better job, as you probably know, having taught too, and your mom and all. So they started encouraging comic books. Our daughter reads, what does she read, Dave? Webtoons?
Well, she's on Webtoons. Webtoons is a online site, or it's a site where you can go to and just read different comic book serials that are published exclusively to the web. And there's hundreds. Yeah. There's probably thousands of them. She subscribes to over 200 of them, and then she also reads a lot of manga now. So she's been either checking it out at the library or reading some of it online. But I'm happy with it, because it's like reading is reading, and if she's reading, I'm happy.
Sure, but she's kind of stuck in a genre, right? And
true, yeah.
When I was, in elementary school, actually, my mom got me into mysteries, and I read all the Nancy Drews, and then Agatha Christie, and then Rex Stout, and I worked my way through pretty much every mystery author before I got into 5th grade, and that's great. If you need help with a mystery, I'm schooled in that. So, but you get in a rut, and so the language is going to be the same. The moves that the writers make are going to be similar because that's how a genre works. So, manga is going to have a lot of similarities in it, and one of the main characteristics, I think, based on the stuff that I've seen, is it's over dramatic.
Very much so. Yeah.
It's tailoring itself to teens.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, if you want to write for an adult audience, you maybe have to torque that up a little bit, or maybe the adult audience in the future is going to want that over dramatic stuff because they came up on manga, and that'll be a change. So,
Yeah.
I think
And
go ahead.
I was just going to say, you mentioned earlier, like how is the reading level different than it was 50 years ago? I would even say like maybe 80 years ago versus, because it's hard for me to think that like 50 years ago was like what, late 60s, early 70s. But I think if you go back even to like the 20s or 30s, it was you read older novels. There's definitely a difference in the elevation of the language than
yeah.
I see like in the 70s forward.
That's a good point. That's a good point. When I think I noticed the difference in reading and the value of reading the classics when I read Moby Dick, and that was after college, where I was just like, well, I was in the middle of a big science fiction series, The Expanse, and those books are huge. And I was like, okay, this is good. I like it. It's a space crime drama, really. So that's interesting to me. And then I was like, but maybe I should read a little Melville just to balance this out. And I started reading Moby Dick, and the chapters aren't very long, a couple pages. Maybe there's a few that are more than a couple pages, but it would take me 30 minutes to read a chapter of Melville because I'm looking up words I don't know and then looking up references I don't understand. And then you go through all that research and then realize it's just a dig at the King of England. And you're like, oh, I've gone through 45 minutes of looking these things up. And it's just, but I do like the way you read it and you're trying to understand it versus when you understand it. So for every chapter, I'd have a note card of words, and then I'd go back and read the chapter again. And that's where you get into the lyricism of it. And you go, oh, there's a flow to this that I'm not picking up because I'm stopping every few words, figuring out what they're saying. And then after I finished that, I would go back and forth with that in the science fiction one. But after I finished the Moby Dick, then the science fiction books I could read so much quicker. And I was like, wow, that is a difference. So then I started trying to find hard things to read, whether it's textbooks or just learning about something that's interesting. And like the history, I think it's called The History of Civilization
Oh yeah.
by the guy and his wife, Durant. And that's some dense reading. A lot of it, you go, I'm not sure if this is real or not. Like is this person's opinion or is this researched? It's going to take me forever to get through this volume of 13 books or whatever it is. And I mean, I'm 80 pages in, but 80 pages into our Oriental Heritage or something like that, the first book. And every now and then when I think I can't make way through a regular book, I'll go back and read some of that. And then when I pick back up a regular book again, it's easy. You're just going right through it. So I can
That's
appreciate
smart.
reading different things.
Yeah, that reminds me of like whenever I get out of practice with the, exercise, and you ride your bike with the gears turned up so it's harder to pedal. And then when you turn them down, you're like, oh, I'm great at
Yeah.
this, right?
Third
Yeah,
gear's not so
no,
bad.
it's true. It's really smart. Yeah, we had our daughter gets her Lexile tested a couple of times a year at school, and in the middle of the year it dropped. And mom immediately made her start reading other things, and that it boosted back up by the next time it got checked. So yeah, it's important to build up that stamina as a reader, I think. The other thing I think too is that those older writers, which people don't realize today, um, it was really expensive for them to publish because paper and ink and the printing process was so expensive. So they didn't write 700-page books, they just didn't. They couldn't. And that made them really boil their stories down to the most salient parts. And today, authors, a lot of authors are proud of writing like 700-page books, and I don't necessarily know that they that they should be. I really feel like they could tighten them up and they would be better. And I think you can see with many authors who started out, unknown like all authors do, but then hit it big, how their books grow as their fame grows because they can refuse that sort of editing as they get more famous, and their books suffer for it, I feel like.
What a great point. I
Yeah.
didn't think about that. I like the format of novellas, especially if you're thinking about an ebook, just
Yeah.
because it's so difficult to look at. Like if you're reading a classic or a Thomas Wolfe, on a Kindle, it seems insurmountable.
Yeah.
So, but if you're reading something that has a chapter that's a few pages and then you can see making way through it and it's only 30,000 words or whatever, that 30 to 60 or whatever the limits are, that seems easier for people to get involved in. So,
Yeah. And I think
Right.
short story writing is really taking off. I think it's maybe more of an art form than the novel now because people have to keep a short story tight. What do you think, Dave? We both love short stories.
Yeah, I'm not sure the short story ever really went away. I mean, what went away, I think, for a while there were opportunities for short story writers to find a place for their stories. But now, in the digital age, it's so easy for folks to just start a website and start publishing their stories online or submitting to an online magazine. I mean, Dianne runs an online magazine and gets some really terrific short stories. And who knows if those authors would have ever even done anything with them. Like the most recent one, I remember reading a comment from one of the authors who looked at Dianne usually comes up with the theme for each issue, and the author looked at the theme. I think the theme was instant, and they said, I've got the perfect story sitting on my computer for this. Submitted it. It was a great story. Dianne ran it. So yeah, I love short stories. I think as our society as a whole gets shorter attention span, we are drawn towards things like that. And also just our days are so busy. It's hard for some folks, I think it's probably a challenge to pick up a 900-page novel versus, an anthology filled with 25 short stories that they could knock off, one story a night for the sheer pleasure of it. Yeah.
Well, once you get the editing done and you have something that you look at and say, this is a book we'll put our name on, we'll publish it, what's the process for a person going through the next steps of that?
Well, it goes really quickly, honestly, which, is surprising, I think, to a lot of authors. And it's surprising to us when we kind of waded into this years ago, not knowing, just figuring we're DIYers too, right? So you can, Dave can put a really nice looking book together in about 2 months, I think. What do you think, Dave?
You're talking like from start to finish, or from the time the edit's done?
From the time the edit's done.
Yeah, it could be could be less than that even. It doesn't take a long time. I would say though, prior to so there's two ways we can work with authors. We're working with an author now who simply wants us to edit their work, and that's fine. We'll edit the work, and then if they want to continue working with us to bring the manuscript to a book, great. But for now, we're editing them, and then our responsibility will be done. Other authors we're working with would like us to bring their manuscript to publication, meaning that so Dianne does the copy edit. Thankfully, Dianne handles a lot of the what do you call this, Dianne? Like the filing for Library of Congress numbers and things
Oh,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, all of the clerical stuff that goes along with publishing a book.
Yeah. So while I'm like Dianne will do the editing and that clerical work, I'll work on the book's exterior and interior design, and typically work with the authors to make sure any final changes they want to see are done. Um, and from there, once all the elements are together, we've assigned it an ISBN. We've got um, the cover is done, the interior is done. It's really just a process of what just getting it, writing up a decent product listing. Right, product listing is super important.
Yeah.
We want to tell a compelling story, and you only have, I think, something like 600 words to do it. And then getting it's basically, then it's a digital, well, it's all digital, but getting the files over to Amazon to have and Ingram is another distributor, and they'll run a quality check on everything, and then scheduling the book's availability.
Yeah. But the other thing is, like, let's say you had signed up with us in May and your book was all edited and it had been through proofreading, and now Dave and you are going to collaborate on your cover and your book is going to be ready to go, let's say September. You might not want to put it out then anyway. And so we would kind of, Dave and I really try to help authors think about their broader career. And also, we're doing a webinar this week on post-publication depression. We want them to think about what they really want when the book is all done. Because authors work so hard on the book, and then when the book is all done, a lot of times it's a big letdown, or they're not getting what they wanted to get from the book. So we want to talk about strategizing the book. If you are interested in maybe submitting your book for awards, and there's a lot of awards out there, but most of them, the authors have to be the ones to submit their book to it. And so maybe you want to throw your hat in the ring for all of these awards. Well, a lot of them are over by July. They might not have picked them yet, but they're done for the year with their submissions. So you don't want to put your book out in September if you're going to have completely missed award season, if award season is important to you. So that's something that you have to think about. You might not want to throw your book right out there if you don't have any audience. If nobody knows about you, we're going to talk to you about how you're going to start social mediating yourself. You're going to create a TR that's different from the TR that people in your personal life know, that's going to go on the web and talk about himself and become somebody that readers can sort of identify with. Because, Dave and I are publishers. Our community is writers. But when you put your book out, you want a community of readers. So that's a whole other ball of wax. So you have to become somebody that's interesting before you ask somebody to buy your book. And a lot of writers are introverts, and that's difficult for them. And they want to go right back into writing the next book. And really, they have to do it while they work on the next book. They have to keep a couple of plates in the air at one time. So we're going to talk to you about, how are you going to get this out there? And I've asked on different writer groups that I belong to on Facebook, I've asked, like, what's your plan for finding readers? And authors have said to me, my characters will find their readers. Well, yeah, maybe 6. But if you want to find more than that, you have to make a plan, like any goal, right? You have to make a plan and you have to think about how you're going to go after it. So even though a book can be, I would say about a month for editing, and then the proofreading and the book production and design, maybe about 2 months. So maybe a 3-month total process. But if you haven't been readying the world for your book's arrival, you have to do that, or you're going to end up sad. for lack of a better term, right, Dave?
Right. Yeah. And I think when I was discussing what happens after everything, I was thinking more of the technical aspects. But to Diane's point, there's a whole lot of other coaching and best practice advice that we provide to authors, because they do need, having the online presence is critical. Having an Amazon author page is helpful. It's also pretty important. Just there's a lot that authors need to do aside from writing the book. Writing the book's kind of like the beginning of that journey. Now, that's like, I would say that's like an 80-20 rule, right? Because when Dianne mentioned earlier, like, you have to know what you want out of your book. Well, some people might want, I got this memoir and I just want to give it out to my family at the next family reunion. Okay, fine. And you probably don't need a website for that. You probably don't need like to start blogging and putting yourself out on social media. But if your objective is, well, I want to publish this book, I want to start getting attention from different, literary agents, or I want to, as Dianne said, I want to enter it in a whole bunch of literary awards. Well, that's a whole different thing. And then you really do need to start thinking about what do I need to do to become a presence as an author, right? To take it beyond my friends and family reading it.
Right.
So those are the kind of like best practices we try to coach authors on to help them succeed in that endeavor.
Yeah.
You may have answered this question just now, but what do you find that most people want from when they write a book? When you were talking about where they have that post-publication depression, what do you think they expect?
Well, so here's an interesting thing, right? If you and we haven't really thought about this as human beings. Let's, first of all, like 98% of books are sold on Amazon. So they're virtually sold. They might be a paperback copy, right? But they're not going into a store and buying them. They're buying them on Amazon. If I put my book up on Amazon and 700 people buy it, the paperback, so I know they've got a physical copy, I know nothing about them. Amazon will not give me any information. They won't tell me their name, their address, nothing. Were they a male? Were they a female? Were they, older, younger? I know nothing about them. I know that 700 people bought my book. Isn't that great? I don't know if they liked it. I don't know what they thought of it. And maybe 2 or 3 of them will leave me feedback. And most often it's the grumpy people that leave feedback. We all know that. You go on Yelp, right? People just want to complain. They seldom leave positive feedback. It's the negative experience that motivates people to leave feedback. So there's this feeling of like, almost like you left your child somewhere and you don't know how they're making out, right? You don't know, so what happened to it? You have no idea. And so you have to mitigate that feeling. And the way that you mitigate that feeling is through that social media promotion, because you make contacts, and readers really want to get to know authors today. They maybe always did, but they didn't have a way to do it, so it's great because people would love to tell you what they thought of your book. And like you said, you need that positive feedback, right? I give it to them as an editor, but they want it from the readers as well. So they just don't want to feel like it's gone out there and been kind of lost. Now, I think if they, possibly if they made $1 million at their book, then they probably wouldn't care. They'd go off to Fiji or something. But most authors aren't going to do that. They're going to make, a lot less on their first book, and they're going to have to summon up the stamina to go into their second book. But if they're making those connections with readers along the way, then they'll feel a little better. I can't necessarily make that connection for them. But one of the things that Dave and I have done is we've really worked on our relationships with everybody that we've ever published. And so if Joe comes out with a new book, we send a PDF of Joe's book to everybody that we've ever published. And we ask them in a group email, they all see each other's email addresses and stuff. And we ask them, this month Joe's book is out, and we'd like you to take a look at Joe's book, and then hop over and leave him a review. And they'll do it. Most of them will do it. I don't ask anybody to read horror if they don't want to read horror, stuff like that, right? I don't want anybody to read anything that's not in their wheelhouse. But they'll do it, and they'll also email back, and they'll say, "Oh gosh, Joe, I really enjoyed your book." And it helps sort of take away that sting of like, it's out there and I don't know what anybody thinks of it. So we really try to do that for our authors, because it's a rough patch. Just this, here it is, I've released it. And what do you get? Silence. It's not like when you put on a play and everybody applauds at the end. It's silence. So you have to kind of shield yourself from that by building in some feedback for yourself. But I would say that most of the writers that we work with are really interested in the critical review. They want to know what people think of it, and they want to know that it's good. I've had a couple of writers who have gone into it strictly because they want to quit their day job, and they find out that if they want to quit their day job at writing, they can maybe get to that point in about 5-10 years, but it's not going to happen with their first book. There's, almost nobody it's going to happen with their first book. So it's a hard thing, because there's a lot of mythology out there that works against authors, and it makes them think, like the woman who wrote 50 Shades of Grey, right? Everybody thinks she just put that book out and she became rich and she didn't have to work anymore. But that's not true. She'd been on fan fiction groups for about 5 years, writing these stories that she compiled together into the book that made 50 Shades of Grey. She already had a huge audience. So when she went on her fan fiction group and said, "I've put it all together in a book," they just lined up and bought it. Writers aren't doing that. And they think that there's some sort of, like when a kid goes to sleep and wakes up and their stocking is full, they think magic has happened, right? Writers think it's the same sort of thing. Like, if I write it, they will come. They won't, because they don't know about you. And the more that Amazon has made it easy for people to DIY their own book, the more the market is getting flooded. And so it becomes even harder for your book to be found among the crowd. So you have to have small expectations, and you have to work on building that connectivity. So that's why we try, at least in our little business, to kind of build that connectivity in with our authors. And we're pretty straightforward with people. We don't fluff anybody, and they're really kind. I think we've managed to work with really kind people who get it, and they are happy to read each other's books and provide that feedback, and the first book reviews on Amazon and stuff. So it's a wonderful thing. We're really grateful for our authors, I think.
What a great explanation. That covered a lot of information there. I would have thought, and I think most people would think, having just the surface of it, is that writers want their book to sell so they can get money. But I can see the importance of that. I can see the validation of it. So you think, oh, well, people must like it if they're buying it, if it's selling this much. And I think it's more of the knowing people are reading it than just knowing people are buying it. I imagine there's people out there that would say, I don't care if people read it as long as they buy it. But
Yeah.
I think most writers are probably thinking, did you get anything out of it? They'd rather hear, I really liked this chapter or these thoughts or this character.
Yes.
I think that would be, if not more important than the sales, I think it would probably be more important than the sales, especially for somebody that has the realistic idea of, I'm not going to make $1 million on this book. But
right. Yeah. I mean, imagine if you were a painter, right? And you painted a painting, um, the only way that painting is going to get seen is if you can get a gallery to hang you. They're not going to hang you. Most galleries are very particular and they don't hang newbies, right? So artists are stuck with the same thing. They have to kind of build that connection. They have to put their work out there. Sometimes they have to give away some of it for free. Sometimes we'll suggest to writers that they give away their ebook for free just to get people to find them, to get interested in them, so that the next book maybe they'll buy. And so it's a process. It's a slow burn, but it can get you to where you want to go. If it doesn't get you to, the vacation home that you hope for, it may or it may not. But if it doesn't get you there, it will get you respect. It will get you readers. It will get people who are interested in your art form. And it is an art form. So I think authors sometimes have to realize, think about it more like a painting. How does a painting get out there? How does somebody find out about it? And it's kind of the same process. Um, uh, you think about all of the artists there are in the world, and you ask people, who's your favorite artist? Probably they're going to say Van Gogh or Monet. They don't know about any others, because it's so hard to break that ceiling, to get found. And so it's something that writers really have to think about. And some of them that we work with do it better than others. And they'll reach out in many different ways. Like we have one author who volunteer, doesn't get paid, writes reviews of other books for the Southern Review of Books. So she's not promoting her book, she's promoting other people's books in the Southern Review of Books. But people know her name now. They know that she's reviewing. If maybe they like her reviews, they might be interested in her book. There are other people out there who maybe offer little generative writing workshops for free online where people can drop in. They give more than they get to sort of find people that become interested in them and then want to be supportive of their art form. And that's what painters do too.
What's the best way for people to follow y'all's work and to contact you if they're interested in the services?
Dave, I'm going to say everything wrong.
So the best way to follow us, gosh, there's so many ways. No, I guess the best way to find us is just at our website, currentwords.com. And then if you search Current Words on Google, you'll probably find our Facebook page, LinkedIn page, things like that. Or you could just go to any of those sites and type in Current Words Publishing. We'll pop right up. If you want to write to us directly, it's Dianne, Dianne at currentwords.com. I'm David at currentwords.com.
Yep.
I have some of those links in the show notes. So if people didn't get a chance to write that down or can't remember it, they can just go to the show notes and find them too. The website is easy on the eyes, so that's good.
That's good. We've worked on that.
Yeah,
we have to do that too. We constantly have to improve. So it's a process for all of us.
Thank you very much for your time. Do you have any thoughts in closing or anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't?
No, but I thought you had really salient questions. I thought they were really great. I think it was a good interview.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And one comment I would say too is, like, as a writer myself, like I really valued the editorial feedback I got from Dianne whenever I work on my writing. And I would encourage writers to recognize the value in the work they're doing, but also recognize the value that, like, having a set of eyes on it can bring to take it out of that quote unquote like tunnel vision, and to just kind of like have the courage to like let somebody else provide feedback on it, who is well read and understands storytelling, because ultimately what you're going to end up with is a stronger story.
Yeah.
And you're also gonna, I think, as a writer, you're gonna gain some experience and grow in the process. So, I know a lot of folks, and we saw it in our, as Dianne said earlier in the interview, we saw it in our writing group, which those were people who voluntarily came to a meeting every 2 weeks for 7 years, knowing that their work was going to be politely critiqued. So it is like kind of like walking on a tight wire to like expose yourself, but to expose, delete that, to expose your work, to expose your work to people, and but again, ultimately, like you get to the end of that, you get to the other pedestal on the other side of that tightrope, and you walk away with a lot of experience, and it stays with you forever.
The first time I edited Dave, he didn't speak to me for 3 days afterwards.
Oh, come on. That was
but our marriage survived.
Yeah, that was. I mean, that was like what 2005 or something. It was a long time ago, and yeah, and I mean, I'm the perfect example of somebody who really, I really. Everything I wrote, I thought was just great and it's wonderful. And I look at some of this stuff. I still have those files, and I look at some of the unedited files, and I just kind of like cringe and think like, wow, this was so bad. But at the same time, like you have to walk that road to get to the freeway where you're kind of like, okay, I've done all this, and now I've got all this experience behind me. I've got all this knowledge, and now like my writing is not. It's in a different place than it was 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, and that's a great feeling. It's great to be able to look back at stuff that you've written and have those cringeworthy moments, because that's where like you knock out all the I don't want to say garbage, but you knock out all that garbage that takes you to the point where like you're writing where you need to be writing, and you're hitting your potential as a writer to do really great work. Right. It's like anything else. You get on that bicycle the first time, you fall off, but after a while, like they're like cruising, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I get very passionate talking about this because it has taken me a long time to recognize well, I mean, we're talking like years ago, but it did take me a while to really value like what an editor like Dianne brought to me, and that was like a long time ago. But I still see it. I still see it like when we work on newsletters and things. I think we're more balanced now as a team, where like she'll fix some things I write, I'll fix some things she writes, and we kind of like meet in the middle, because we've learned like from each other like what works, what doesn't work, and I think that's what writers walk away after working with an editor for a while. They learn what works, what doesn't work.
Yeah. If you want to do that shop small thing, Dave and I are totally a mom and pop shop in every sense of the word. Yeah. So, Dave wrote this beautiful, I think it's really fantastic espionage novel. And he gave everybody in the book names from Monty Python, I think, like Mr. Poopy Pants. And like he gave them these outlandish names that were really ridiculous, unpronounceable, and kind of childish almost in a way, right? And he laughed. He thought they were fantastically funny.
Yeah, it was my like I used to write comic books before that, and I think a lot of that spilled over. And Dianne was like, "All right, you've got this really serious scene happening, but you got like,
way can you have
a character
name?
name like Mr. Dinkledork or something?" And it's like you can't.
And he went off and sulked for 2 or 3 days. Then he came back with serious names for a serious book, right? You have to.
Yeah.
So sometimes, our personality overtakes what we're trying to do, and we have to,
and I think with editing,
work that out in life and love and marriage.
And with editing, I think there's a thing called like the 7 stages of grief, where like you first get the edits and you're just like, oh my God, and then you're in denial. No, can you? And then you just, eventually you get to that stage where you're like, okay.
Yeah. But all writers make those kinds of mistakes, like somebody recently wrote a book that we worked on, where everything was in first person, and it was a cop drama, I think. Everything was in first person, and from the point of view of the cop. And it was very exciting. It moved. And then there was a scene where the bad guys all got together in a room, and the cop wasn't there. He was tied up someplace else. And the writer told the scene from the point of view of somebody in the room. And I was like, the first person point of view from the cop, the whole story. The cop is not in this room. This scene cannot be in the book because it's the cop telling the story. So we had to find a way to make it work. Yeah. But the writer didn't realize it, and the scene was important. So we had to find a way to have it work. So, it's little things like that, right? I mean, well-written book, moved, exciting. I liked it. And then all of a sudden this scene with important information in it.
Yeah. Yeah. We both kind of shook our heads saying, wait, he's not there to tell. He can't be telling this because he's not. Yeah.
We got to break it to him gently. And so we kind of talked it through, because he didn't want to have him there. He didn't want to put him in the scene. And I said, okay, that's fine. So we wrote something on the front, like Officer Smith, later learned about this scene that took place at the something hotel or whatever, which I don't think is the best, but we kind of managed to make it work for the author's vision. But that's a problem that people don't think about. So when you choose the point of view of first person, you can't have anything happen that first person doesn't know about. So, those are the things, right, that editing does. And those are the things that authors are not thinking of because they're just telling their compelling story. Sorry, we went off topic a little bit.
No, that's good. That's good. The thing about the writing groups, I think that does help because it shows you what other people think immediately. And sometimes I think you said politely reviewed. I mean, some writing groups I've been to have stretched the politeness, but I think if you're resistant to edits, getting somebody that you value to read it is going to help because maybe those ideas carry a little more weight. And then the other is do some sort of collaborative writing. I think that writing and giving your work to an editor is kind of collaborative anyway, because the editor is going to have some thoughts on it. But if you are writing a story with somebody else, however you decide to do it, whether it's you talk about it first and then you write it together, or one person writes a little and another person writes a little and it goes back and forth. You have to match up the voice, the sound of it. So you learn a lot about writing that way. And then also you learn it, from my experience, is you learn how to let go of the control of it, where it's not just you in a room writing something. It's you trying to get somebody else to buy into it in the real time of you writing it. And I liked collaborative writing, did 2 books with that, 2 short books. And
cool.
It does make you a better writer, and it makes you, for me, it made me look forward to writing by myself more too. That's not because I was aggravated by the collaboration, but it was just, if you find yourself not motivated to write, then write something collaboratively, and then you might want to write by yourself more.
Yeah, it puts gas in the tank. That's a good thing to do. I like to go to hear people read too, poetry readings and stuff like that. Sometimes because it's really great and it inspires me, and sometimes because it's really awful and I think, oh, I could go do that better. Puts gas in the tank. So then you're willing to go back and write again. When we ran our workshop, we had a protocol where when it was your turn to have your work discussed, you read it out loud to us, because the act of reading it out loud it becomes performative, and then your mouth will stumble over things that your eyes never do. And then a couple of times a year, we would trade off and we would say, okay, you're not going to read your work this time. You know, Dave's going to read your work and Sue's going to read Janet's work. And having somebody else take your 10 pages and read them aloud and seeing how that person stumbles or what that person emphasizes gives you a different view too, right? So all of that stuff puts gas in the tank. It's all good.
Yeah, we also had a general rule of no defending. So you basically read your work, you accept, you listen to feedback, whether you do anything with it or not is your call. But you're not in a position where you say, okay, you don't understand. What I meant here was blah blah blah. Like, no, we're not. You're not here to defend your work. You're here just to share your work and to get some feedback from folks who are like you, who are like writers. And it was like challenging for some members of the group not to go down that rabbit hole and just start defending. And we were just like, look, you just gotta cut it off and like take it or leave it. We're not forcing you to do it. But I'm just mentioning this because if anybody listening to this is in a writing group or thinking of starting one, which I think everyone should do who likes to write, I think you'll end up with a better experience if you just kind of set, whether it's that ground rule or other ground rules. We had a number of ground rules, and some of them involve time, because some folks, you'd say like, all right, we're gonna have a 10-minute time limit. Well, it's like, or 20. We used to try to do 20 minutes, I think, 10 to read and 10 for feedback. And some people would just kind of like just completely abuse it, and we got to the point where we had to use a timer. But you just do things to keep it fair and equal, and then you end up with a happier workshop.
As fair and equal as possible. So
the timer is a good idea.
Yeah, timers are a good idea. Yeah, and everybody's phone has one, right? So yeah.
And we would rotate the timekeeper too, because again, like, it shouldn't be the burden of one person every time you get together to, all right, I have to do the timekeeper again, because it, in a way, like, even though you're just this lowly timekeeper, like you're the person who's cutting them off ultimately, right? It's your phone ringing. So we tried to alternate.
Yeah, and you have to make a point of asking for what's good about the piece. And we would always do that too. Tell us what you liked about it. Tell us where you were confused, stuff like that, right? Because we don't want to just hammer on negative points. And sometimes in the writing groups, there's a tendency to sort of be like, I'm the best critiquer, and just sort of, take people's legs out from under them over and over and over again. You don't want to do that. You're there to encourage them. You're there to help them. And they're there to encourage you and help you. So you have to always mix in praise. And I just, in general, find as an editor and as a human, that it's much easier if I think something isn't working to ask a question about it than it is to say this is written badly. I might ask, what are you hoping that I'll feel when I read this? And then we start dialoguing about it, and it's less offensive than saying, this didn't make me sad, this made me angry, or whatever. So it's better to ask. So that's, I think, something that people can do if they work with others in a group.
Yeah, I agree. It's easier to take somebody else's opinion after you've given your opinion and seen other people do the same, because then I guess it just civilizes you as a writer.
Yeah.
Where you can say, oh, okay, this is just what they're thinking when they read it.
Yeah.
One way in a writing group that if you have somebody that doesn't like to read is give it to the person that is going to read it as fast as they can. And then that person, okay, hold on, I'll read it. Because you get to mess it up like that. So, yeah.
One other ground rule I'll just mention again, just on the topic of writing groups, is we learned pretty early on too that, like, defining the scope of what feedback is, because there were always folks in the room who were kind of like, on page 2, line 21, you missed a comma. And we're just like, that's not the feedback. This is not a proofread. Like, we're looking for feedback on, like, the structure of the story, the writing style, things like that. And folks would go into it as like a proofreader, and after a while we just had to say, look, if it's not relevant to the story in like the greater scheme, please don't mention it. Like, please don't mention a missing period. Like, you forgot to capitalize Washington in Washington D.C. Like, they don't need to know that. That's not the purpose of the writing group.
No.
So just something to think about for folks in writing groups. I hope you're
The
not.
writing group is supposed to put
using
gas in the tank, right? So it's supposed to make you feel like you want to go home and write again. You can't wait to come back with your next chapter. So, and if it doesn't do that, then it's not working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, I've been in a couple different types of writing groups. One was it's called Shut Up and Write.
Oh, yeah.
And just get together and you're with a bunch of other people and they're writing and you're writing. And then after that, whatever time you have, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, then you can talk. And sometimes you talk about what you're writing, and other times you're just talking to writers. That's the thing I like the best about writing groups, is just meeting other writers. And then I've been in writing groups that were critique groups where you bring in, I mean, they put a limit on the words, but sometimes people steamroll those limits. But you, then they read it themselves, or somebody else reads it, and then people comment on it around in the group. But you have that paper usually that you can write down things on. So I would, if there was a period missing, I might note it just by circling.
Sure,
but
that's
I
great.
wouldn't bring it up because they're going to get this paper back. And I would probably put other notes on there that I wouldn't say in the group too. Not that it was bad, but just for the essence of time. And then I like the compliment sandwich version of it, a good thing, a thing to work on, another good thing. So yeah, writing groups are definitely worth the time. And then if you go to a writing group and you don't like it, don't go to that writing group again.
That's right. Don't stay. That's right. Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. And it helps too if you go to a writing group and you feel like it's a comfortable group, to bring your work in and say, I'm concerned about the dialogue in this scene. So that sort of will help sometimes focus the energy in a more productive way. Yeah.
That's what when I took stuff in, it was short and I was just doing it to see what other people, like if it tracked or if it makes sense, or if I'm assigning different dialogue tags than normal. Is this easy to read? Is it easier this other way? And it's less of I'm trying to tell you a complete story and more of I'm trying to figure out this element of writing. But I've been to writing groups that had where you would get a copy before you go to the group of the writing, and then you would just talk about it there. That's a little more time investment, but it can still be good. It's still worth it. But yeah, as you said,
that's how they do it in college. They give it out, and then you come back the following week, and everybody expected to have read it and noted on it. But in private life, it's most people don't want to be that involved, right? So yeah.
Give me 200 words, 300 words. Let me see what I think.
Yeah. Right. No, that's great. That's wonderful.
All right. So your email and your website will be in the show notes.
Great.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Could talk about writing a lot. I focused more on the publishing and the editing than writing, but maybe sometime in the future we can talk about writing. I see the passion in your eyes when we started talking about it. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, we'd love to do that too. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I'll talk to you at the end of this musical exit, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, likewise.